Hey everybody, we're Sonic Bloom, and we're doing Sonic Bloom Live, episode
12,
12.
I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
episode 12. Yeah,
We got there.
we got there. Yeah, you've already heard our intros before. I won't give another one, but this week, we're going to be covering a handful of industry news and our topic of choice this time. So let's just cover those details. Eric, what's the first one?
The first one is going to be about Gabe Newell teasing potential Valve games on consoles by the year's end.
Yeah.
Justin, how about story number 2?
Number 2 is we got confirmation that there's a metric ton of PlayStation studio titles in development. And we'll talk about that, what it means about PlayStation and their overall strategy. What's topic number 3, Eric?
It's about the old Starfield leaks. BioWare game announced a few years back, and it's been pretty hush-hush recently. But there have been... You're right.
Bethesda.
I get those two confused all the time.
Yeah,
the bees,
enough.
man.
The bees.
Yeah, so the Bethesda game Starfield has had some leaks recently. They look pretty real, and there have been some announcements about potential platform exclusivity there, which is also unsurprising. But we'll get there. What's the last topic that we're going to cover today, Justin?
I think this one will be the fun one, which is E3 is coming up in the beginning of June. So I think we're like 2 weeks away from it. Maybe a little bit longer. Either way, we'll take a look at what we expect from E3 and what we expect actually more so from each company in order to keep moving forward and how to capture the best audience that they can possibly get given their individual strategies. So, all right, let's start with the first topic. Do you wanna kick it off, or do you want me to throw it out there?
No, you start it up.
All right. So I don't know if it was this past week, but Gabe Newell was giving a sort of like stage talk, and someone threw him the question about are you going to be publishing games on consoles again? And he actually gave a kind of surprising answer that they were in fact assessing consoles, and that he'd have more news to come. What's particularly interesting about this is that Gabe is pretty outspoken about his distaste for consoles in general. The last time they published a game on console was under EA, and that was the Orange Box.
Right.
And that's when and actually notoriously Gabe was very outspoken about how horrible it was to develop on the PlayStation 3 at that time, and that the Xbox Series X or Xbox 360. Yeah, way back when, was better, but he had no high praise for either way. He's a interesting
vocal person. Yeah,
vocal, has strong opinions. So either way, it's kind of interesting to see the turn. And yeah, like I think we can just dive into that. Really, we covered the fact that the last game was like the Orange Box, which by the way is a great compilation of games. If you haven't played
it's so good. Yeah.
Why do you think Gabe has had a change of heart?
I'm partial to look at the timing here and wonder if it has any connection to the whole Epic Games thing with Apple, and all that antitrust stuff, and this could be Gabe looking at a potential massive shakeup in delivery systems and seeing if they can expand Steam as a store onto consoles and more platforms, then that means that they can continue to expand their reach. And, that's where Valve makes all of its money. When it comes down to the amount of games them as a developer have been creating, when are we going to see Half-Life 2 Episode 3, right? I mean, that's that's a long-running joke in the industry. Yeah. And focusing on the stores and seeing potential where, if things go a certain way with Apple in particular, and that could be a watershed moment where Suddenly, if the courts come down on the side of Epic, then suddenly it's open season and Valve needs to be ready to go day one with getting stuff on there. It may also be something that Sony and Microsoft, or Sony and or Microsoft, are looking to make a deal with Valve in order to get a leg up on one or the other in this case. Do you have any thoughts on this? I've kind of been throwing out a bunch of random ideas, but
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally there's like the elephant in the room, which is the way we're gaming as we know it, and the
Mhm.
content of gaming has seen a significant shakeup since the PS4, and it's largely because console games have made it to x86 architecture, making them easily portable to PCs. So, if we're looking at the current landscape of gaming, hardware is becoming less of a problem and the content is the thing that's super valuable, and it always has been. It's just that the consoles were always the way to get people bought into an ecosystem and bought into a like, you know, platform exclusive or whatever else. So I think there's just the elephant in the room is things are getting shaken up, content is being gone after pretty aggressively.
Yeah.
Different consoles have different strategies, but basically, you know, you're beginning to see Epic Store, Steam, and then the competition with things like xCloud, and ultimately, like, could very well be competing with Sony, you know, in their PlayStation Now service if they ever decide to make that something more prominent than what it currently is, as like a back catalog of old PlayStation titles. But you know,
Yeah.
you see things like Sony has developed or has invested a ton of money in Epic. So, like, we don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Everything that's been going on has been quiet. So this may be a strategy for Valve and the Steam platform to save itself from growing competition.
It could also be something like you know, you mentioned that hardware is kind of becoming a non thing. And Valve for a very long time has had the big picture mode where you can basically connect your computer up to a large screen TV and switch into that mode, connect a controller, and it's like playing a console. That's the idea of the cell. So it could be a situation in the future where what they mean by playing on a console is you install the Steam app from, you know, on your Xbox or PlayStation, and suddenly it is intelligently capable of understanding, oh, this is a streaming situation. It's streaming from your PC, maybe even some kind of cloud solution that they're developing to run any PC game in the cloud. And then it's going to your desktop, or not your desktop, I'm sorry, to your console, and you're using your standard console controller to control the app and play the game through what is a shell that basically converts the PlayStation or Xbox inputs into something that's streamed either to your computer or to the cloud. I mean,
Valve has the benefit of the fact that, like, they probably I don't know how many users they have, probably, you know, millions
oh,
of users that and, like, even myself
many,
included,
many,
that
many.
hasn't really been into big PC gaming. I still have like 20 titles that I've collected over the years that I'd love
Yep.
to have access again, on a machine that could run it. And basically, it probably wouldn't be a stretch to say, like, lower performing titles could run well on the Xbox Series X or could run well on the PlayStation 5, if you know, like, ported. There's no reason to
Yeah.
think that, like, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Valve has been working on some technology as well. To they have a translation layer that they've been building that allows people who have Linux to run Windows developed games, I believe, or with very minimal changes. It basically converts um, DirectX, I want to say 12. I don't remember the exact spec, but some form of DirectX into Vulkan APIs. And apparently the speeds that they've been getting out of that as they've been iterating over it have been huge. It is, in many cases that I've read, it seems to be the preferred way to run a game if the game has good support there, even over like a port to Linux that was done by the developer, because you know, it wasn't as optimized as the DirectX, and Valve has done a very good job of making that conversion library. So it could be something where that's the approach that they're looking at, is no, you'll actually download the game to the console. But it's interesting. We'll have to follow this because, you know, especially with all the strange shakeups that may or may not occur this year or next. There'll be some interesting stuff. It could also just be that this is simply like, yeah, we're looking at updating Orange Box for modern consoles. People like that.
I would be jazzed about that. I just want to get Portal 1 and Portal 2.
And Portal 2. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Portal 2 is one of those games, like the last time it was released on console was on the PS3. Well, let's move on to the next subject, because you know, that Valve is just speculation at this point.
Yep.
So yeah, I think another interesting thing. Actually, I kicked off the last one. Why don't you go after this one, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So you know, we're what? Let's see, November 12th. We're now almost 7 months into the lifespan of the PlayStation 5, and there's still a massive shortage, as well with the Xbox Series. And yet we're still kind of the players are hungry for, you know, next gen targeted content for both platforms. And it sounds as though there are from who was it? It was Herman Hulst, studio head of PlayStation Studios, was kind of, he said in an interview with Wired, I believe it is, that the studios have 25 titles in development for the PS5. Now, it's not clear if they're exclusively for the PS5, though it does sound that way. And regardless, that is a lot of titles for a first party to just come out and say, this is how many titles we're working on. Like, normally first parties are a little bit more cagey about numbers that they want to give out and that kind of thing, but it sounds as though they're pretty gutsy about making that announcement. And just you know, it seems like it may be a thing that they can either use to assuage the concerns of the people that just spent a ton of money and lucked out on getting an actual console, to say no, content's coming, or to make the competition sweat a bit. Oh, it wasn't that. It was, I'm sorry, I just saw the line. It was about half of the 25 are new IP, on top of the fact that there are that many titles. It's that many new IP titles, which is just like mind-boggling. How many new IP titles did we get in the PS4 era? Do we know if Returnal? That's a Sony PlayStation Studios title, right?
That's a studio title that's coming from a third party, Housemarque, who is not an internal studio of theirs. So,
right,
which actually gives us an indication about how they might be working on their partnerships. And actually, Herman Hulst has said this before, that this go around, they're exercising their alliances with third party developers to expand their studio access, and to expand the amount of titles that they're going to be able to generate that are going to be PlayStation exclusives, or at least PlayStation Studio titles. And you know, there might be things like Project Athia, if we recall that. I think that's got a timed exclusive on it at a minimum. So yeah, I mean, Sony is, it appears, is aggressively going after their own content, and they're just doing things differently than they have before, which was largely just relying on their own internal studios to create the heavy hitters, and then hoping that they might be able to get some small timed exclusivity for some of the bigger titles like Final Fantasy
things. This does feel like a reassurance to people, given that 7 months in, we've had one or just a handful of titles released for the PS5. A lot of them are backwards compatible with PS4, which makes sense. We're in a cross-generation phase, and we'll slowly start to see more PS5 exclusives come out, or at least next-gen exclusives, including the series consoles and that, for cross-platform titles. But having the 25 number drop from a first party is that's pretty exciting. Uh, even half of that many titles that are in development for a first party is pretty big. I mean, Nintendo does it by having lots of small teams that they work independently on, and then as a game starts to take shape, they kind of pull people in and make a team out of that and bring it to the finish line. And then while other titles are kind of in a prototyping, find the fun phase, uh, that's not really how the PlayStation Studios works. How are they able to get that many titles simultaneously under development?
I think Sony rightly identified the fact that their value is creating like the highest quality AAA games. And part of it the benefit that they have is that they're only targeting one console, so they get to maximize that console. Like you look, I think Sony has identified the fact that, and we'll see if this is true, that their internal studios and the sort of infrastructure that they've built to support the studios that they have is a really powerful tool to take games that may look promising and turn them into AAA polished pieces. And I think you actually see this with Returnal. Housemarque is known for its like arcadey gameplay, but some of the stuff that people are talking about is the narrative pieces that are in there. And I guarantee the narrative pieces came in not from Housemarque themselves, but probably from a lot of support from people who've worked on games like The Last of Us or Spider-Man or whatever else to create compelling stories, narratives, and to create the glue for the game itself to make it better and stickier and more endearing to the player.
So it sounds like there's more fluidity with personnel resources amongst the teams. Like, oh, this game is at this phase of development. They're really ramping up on their story content. Let's send some people from Naughty Dog over to that team who have done that many times and just help them polish it up and get it to the right quality, to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they're like looking at third-party developers saying, look, we're going to fund the development of your game in exchange for making an exclusive title. But also part of the thing that you get is you get access to our studio support system, which will help you develop assets, will help you develop the story, will help you do all these things that usually a small studio has no access to whatsoever. And they're giving like AAA, content creation to these studios to make a game that they would normally never be able to achieve on their own. But the fact that like Holst has talked about working with third parties more than they ever have before may suggest that they're like leveraging their internal infrastructure to be like a steroid injection to these small companies which would normally not be able to create the type of content that Sony, I think, is going to demand from their funded titles.
Right.
Yeah, I guess.
Cool.
I mean, do you feel like you have any other insights on that, like what they might be doing?
Well, we spoke about this a little bit, I think a week or two ago, where there was a studio that was trying to do a remake of The Last of Us 1 and update it for current gen, like a remastered version of it. And eventually that Sony internal team effectively got taken over by staff from Naughty Dog. So I think that kind of speaks a lot to this. Naughty Dog had just finished up Last of Us 2. They were pulling people on from that. Theoretically, they're already working on another project or two in early phases, theoretically. But the fact that they're able to pull team members in to work on another project while other things are happening kind of speaks to that fluidity and the view that the Sony studio heads might be taking with their teams, and seeing them less as like these are hard walls and we can't touch the resources within these silos, to be more like, okay, no, there is expertise in here that is lacking over here, at least on the team. We need to shuffle people around or, set some time aside for this other studio to help cross the finish line, this really high bar finish line that we've set for them.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I think it's right to call out that Sony has a style and a priority which is largely narrative driven. I think it comes from Sony's internal Hollywood studios that are going like, look, if we're gonna have two narrative driven things, like why can't creative artists from Sony Animation or Sony Sony Movies also contribute to like script writing and storyboarding and like character development and character, like all this stuff. Like there's no reason why this stuff doesn't go between. And I think Sony has really proven that games, as they begin to mature or as they are maturing, can make really compelling, if not more advanced narrative devices than even movies themselves. Yeah. Anyways, let's go to the next subject. The next one is Xbox Studios. After their acquisition of Bethesda.
Not BioWare.
Not BioWare, which is an EA company. But their purchase of Bethesda, they're going to start reaping the benefits of that purchase at some point. And basically, Bethesda has been quiet for well over a year, probably because they've been in talks with Microsoft for well over a year about getting the purchase. We're coming up to E3, and we're now beginning to hear about the games that we heard from Bethesda like 2 years ago when they were like, "There's a new Fallout in development. There's a new Elder Scrolls game that's going to be like Skyrim but on a newer engine." And then they talked about Starfield. And everybody's been wondering, now that the Microsoft purchase has been confirmed, are all those titles going to be exclusive? Are some of them going to be exclusive? And basically what was confirmed in like a handful of leaks, including the Starfield one, was that there's another Fallout game being developed. And there was no mention about exclusivity, for one. And B, there's been Starfield leaks that finally show more of the game, which I think tells us something about what to expect in the near future, and more so that Starfield is indeed going to be an exclusive to the Xbox platform. I think a real question is like, does this say anything about how Xbox is strategizing with their vast amounts of purchases in the last 2 years, 3 years?
I'm trying to think of a good way to put it. It feels like a pump and dump, where they bought, and I say that it's a little bit derogatory, but it, given the conversation that we just had about Nintendo's approach to studios and game development and Sony's approach, this one feels like more of the same Microsoft that we got from the 360 era, let's say, possibly even as far back as the original Xbox, where they buy a studio. That studio makes games, releases it for their platform. They had in particular, two big buys in the early days of Xbox were Bungie and Rare Studios. Regardless, both of those were studios that Microsoft somewhat quasi-managed or didn't manage and just said, please make games and they will be for us. And then since then, has somewhat dropped the ball on creating the games and getting them out. This Bethesda purchase, it really seems like we just don't want to bother with dealing with exclusivity. We just want to have people make games for our platforms and not have to worry about the option. If we want them to be exclusive, they just will be. Like, we get to decide that. Otherwise, the games are going to be made just the way they were before anyway. So, like, that's what I mean by pump and dump. They bought a bunch of studios and publishers to get a bunch of IP that people that know well. And then now they can say, like, great, you can continue to make your games, but you're going to make them where we tell you can release them for. Outside of that, it's hard to see any specific strategy other than we just need to confirm that we will have big hitting titles on our cloud platform day one. Like, that seems to be the real big goal and of their big spend. And it kind of feeds into that whole narrative that we see developing, of a focus on the cloud and cloud gaming. I mean, do you have any other thoughts on that that might be a little bit more sneaky?
Sneaky. Well, I'm not sure if it's actually sneaky, but I do have thoughts, which is I'd say what we were seeing from Microsoft is kind of a different demeanor in the way that they're approaching gaming now, right? Like we know content is king. We know the Xbox platform itself, the console, the series consoles are more secondary to the fact to Game Pass, where Game Pass is like the actual platform they care about, and Xbox Series X is a platform that you can play those games on, but it's not so much hardware that defines the games.
Right.
And with this, and I think with the approach of Game Pass, like Microsoft has taken a very different disposition on how they talk about things, and by that I mean they are trying to be like more holistic in their approach to things, like going like, well, what's the point of console or console wars? And they like, to some degree, like they're not wrong, right? There's like, what is the purpose of having these divisions between consoles? It's been something that's been rumored for a while that like at some point Microsoft and Sony would just get along and either create like one piece of hardware, but instead you see them not waiting for Sony to like play ball, but instead going like, no, we're going to create a platform that is more open and accessible. And they started with the Xbox Live platform, going like, oh yeah, we have no problem with cross-platform play. We'll happily do it with PlayStation, but PlayStation's just not playing ball. And PlayStation started getting needled for like, why aren't you having a more open platform? And to me, what it looks like is they're unwilling to take a game like Fallout, which has been enjoyed on multiple consoles for years, and go, we're locking this up in its PlayStation or in its Xbox exclusive. I think people would get really, and reasonably and justifiably upset at Microsoft for taking a formerly multi-platform game and making it exclusive to their console. But what they can do is things like Starfield, that has no history of being used on other consoles, and saying, no, it's actually legitimately exclusive. If you want to play it, you either buy an Xbox, you buy a PC, or you get Game Pass with cloud streaming. And I think that's probably the most reasonable way that they can pursue getting more benefit out of things like the purchase of Bethesda, without really like, crossing players that they're probably hedging on at some point getting onto the platform by being open and welcoming to gamers even on the PlayStation platform.
Yeah, we'll have to see about titles like Fallout, whether that actually is still released across platforms or not. I'm feeling a little pessimistic about that, and that's just a gut reaction looking at what's going on. I just saw a number earlier today where it said that I don't know if what the sales numbers that people looked at were, but the PlayStation 5 has apparently outsold the Xbox Series consoles 2-1 in first quarter 2021. It's hard to say because we're in a we're in a pandemic, but we're also in a chip shortage. So it's, components are extremely hard to get. And how are the fabs handling all this stuff? But this could be a thing where Microsoft sees this as like, we need people, we need butts in seats. And if this is the game to do it, awesome. Lock it down. Like that's my concern, is that the business unit at Microsoft is going to come in and say, nah.
Yeah, they may leverage their studios, but I have a feeling that they're not going to take aggressive stance on burning bridges with players that had formerly expected access to games that they had once access before. And some of the proof is that them buying Obsidian, and with that was Outer Worlds. Outer Worlds was released not just on multiple consoles under Microsoft, but then further released on the Switch long after Microsoft had purchased them, and before I think there was a Switch version in development. So like under Microsoft, they're like, we want to make a port that goes to Switch as well. We want to take this software and make it available there.
About that. There was a game I think I played on the Switch though that did that was published by Microsoft. I remember going, huh, okay.
Or you got ported to the.
It did. You're right. I haven't played that one yet, but yes, you're right. That one is.
It's another game that like they're like, we'll run on the Switch without an issue. Let's port it over. And so it's like they're making very odd decisions, which is very uncommon for the way everybody is used to seeing console wars play out, which is you know, these the manufacturers of the consoles hoarding titles and IP to release exclusively on their console. And I still think Microsoft's going to pursue that, but I think you might see that like they're unwilling to burn bridges. And I wouldn't be surprised if the next Elder Scrolls game and the next Fallout game will make it to PlayStation. They may do something where it's just like, yeah, I'll come to PlayStation 3 months later. So if you really want to get it now, consider getting Game Pass, enjoying it while you can, and then having that save port over to your PlayStation, and then playing the rest of it there. I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know, but I'm seeing like a different Microsoft that probably acknowledges their position, and that they need to really, if their game streaming platforms to take off, it means that they also capitalize on PlayStation players. Actually, in an interesting segue, our topic of choice this week was E3 predictions. What we think. And not just like, oh, what games are we going to see, but more like, what is the necessary strategy for each manufacturer to pursue to win E3 and whatever winning E3 means for them. Since we're talking about Microsoft, let's start with Microsoft.
Sure.
Given that, what do you think they need to do in order to win for them?
I want to answer this as a gamer, but I will leave that alone. And I think answering it as like from the business perspective is, I believe that they almost need to ignore the Series X and the Series S and just focus on games coming to their Xbox platform. They're clearly trying to make the Xbox brand a piece of Windows as well. So they're blurring the lines. And I think, to your point, the Game Pass is like the presentation that they want to put on that, especially since cloud gaming is only a piece of that. And, there is the whole service of Game Pass where it's more like PlayStation Plus, where you actually get games on that and can download them to your PC and play them on your PC, or download them to your Xbox and play them on there, versus the streaming thing we like to talk about. So yeah, Game Pass is the overall umbrella. I think that's where they're going to be focused. And I think that there will be exclusives to that platform. They're not, I would be shocked to see even a single Xbox Series X/S exclusive that wasn't also going to Windows.
I think for the most part, like, Microsoft has to pursue three strategies here, which is convince people who have purchased an Xbox that their purchase was not in vain. So, I think they're going to be really clever with their wording and not reveal the fact that, like,
also
the
on
fact
PC.
The fact that you own an Xbox doesn't really mean much anymore,
right?
And that the platform actually is Game Pass. I think Microsoft's internal strategy is that the console is an optimal way to play it for relatively inexpensive, but the content is the thing that they care about, and the content is on their Game Pass platform. That is Xbox now. I think they'll also be really clever about not really revealing which games are going to be cross-platform, but they're going to really, I think the thing they need to do is go, why should everybody be looking at Game Pass as a thing that they would subscribe to, regardless of what kind of hardware they have?
Right.
And I think they'll probably do it because right now they have a metric butt ton of studios, all of which have stuff in development. And I think this E3, they're going to actually, they'll be able to show real gameplay and not pull a Halo Infinite. Yeah.
Oh god.
And be like, okay, let's selectively show the stuff that looks the best. And videos where it makes sense because the development of that game is like a couple years off. I also think that they're going to come out swinging with Halo Infinite and be like, we messed up, and here's Halo Infinite looking, 10x better, maybe selectively because they can only show certain levels, but either way, they may very well be able to show a much more impressive Halo Infinite to appease their Xbox gamers. All right, well that covers Microsoft. Let's talk about your favorite platform, Nintendo. Nintendo's in a kind of a weird situation. There's plenty of rumors swirling around about HD or like 4K, excuse me, version of the Switch or a new piece of hardware. But more so, they're kind of like in a weird gaming lull. And compounding that with a cycle in their system where they've outperformed their wildest expectations, and they have a ton of new gamers that they need to keep buying
engaged
on their platform. So what does Nintendo have to do?
First of all, they have to make a lot more Pokemon stuff. I think that's a big one. I would not be surprised to see several Pokemon announcements. But I do think that there is just across the board opportunity for Nintendo to make big announcements about the titles. I would love to see more about their Breath of the Wild 2 game that they talked about. I think that's the kind of thing that they need to hit home on. Switch titles, there are many multi-million sellers, tens of millions of sellers. I think one of the biggest ones is Animal Crossing, which they should have announcements about because there are so many people that are big into that game or that style of game in their player base now. But playing to that population and playing to the population of people that like the Mario games, that are into that console sphere because of what Nintendo uniquely provides, that kind of Nintendo game style. I think they need to amp that up. There's been a bit of a dearth in the last 6 to 9 months in that space. And a lot of the announcements, I think you and I covered in a recent one of these shows, tried to go over upcoming titles, and there wasn't that much that was, clearly in that kind of ballpark. So it'll be an interesting thing to see. I think that's what they need to focus on is games to sell. Any announcement about new hardware is, to me, a nice to have. I think they just need to capitalize on their player base right now and show the player base that there is more of what they are on the platform for coming with. Do you have any differing opinions on this, Justin? Or
yeah, I think there's one thing that like Nintendo's actually been really awful at capitalizing on, and that's like, which is going to be a weird thing to say, but the Nintendo has a nostalgia factor that is very strong. I think it helped drive the sales of the Wii. It's helping drive the sales of the Switch. When people go, I suddenly have a bunch more time than I thought, and I want to occupy that time with something that is comforting and I recall as being fun. And I think you will find that a lot of the people who are purchasing the Switch over the pandemic are people who own maybe a Super Nintendo or a Nintendo or maybe an N64, but may have skipped console generations in between. And the weird thing that Nintendo is just not great at capitalizing on is capitalizing on that nostalgia. They're able to create like a mini Wii or a mini NES, a mini NES, and they sold ridiculously well, and like acknowledging that like people want to go back to this. But now you have people who've bought a brand new console and they still are not like, they're doing what I think people who've stuck with Nintendo the entire time have said, which is like being more adventurous with when you explore Mario, when you explore Zelda. And I think it's amazing that they're actually exploring new ways of playing those games or making those games. But what they also need to now balance is, how do you get people the Mario games that they may be more familiar with? I think it also tells you why like Mario Kart 8 might do so well, is because Mario Kart has not changed a whole lot in the ever since the N64 version of it. I don't know. It's stuff like, and I said this in one of our other our other videos. It's like, if you're gonna go ahead and take the time to like remake, Link's Awakening, they still haven't touched Link to the Past. It's like, look at if people last bought a N60 or like last bought a Super Nintendo or even an N64, like where are those titles? Like,
yeah.
How come we haven't revisited Ocarina of Time, or how come we haven't revisited, um, Link to the Past in a way that makes it a really compelling buy? So I think there's something there where it's like Nintendo really has to hit on the nostalgia factor, advance it, like provide things to both types of gamers, like do new interesting things, but also like call the yearning of games that they're classic games that they weirdly have not returned to and have not touched in forever.
What I guess, Justin, to sum up what you said, put it in context relative to what I had said. They have a much broader audience now that they need to capitalize on. They have our attention, and they just need to basically, look to us as the gaming population and say, we see you, we hear you, here you go. And then hand us titles that we're looking for.
Let's move on to Sony, because we still have to cover them as well. So yeah, what does PlayStation have to do to win?
This is honestly, I think, the hardest of the three for me. Microsoft is pretty straightforward, just convincing buyers about Game Pass, or players. Nintendo has to. They've made a large player base potential. They need to capitalize on it. Sony, it's really tough because they are continuing to just sell PlayStation 5s as fast as they can make them. And you're right, they do have a very large install base of PS4 players, or players, who are also hungry for games. And it can be very difficult to make a game that is PS5 optimized, but also still plays well enough on the PS4. What they could potentially do to appease those two audiences, I think for the PlayStation 4, they could announce a whole bunch more greatest hits, and push on, reviving some of the titles, or I don't know about updating, but bringing some of their bigger titles into the greatest hits fold and making them available. They've already been doing things over the last, as part of the pandemic, giving away free titles, and I think that goes a very long way to making their player base happy. I think for the PlayStation 5, they really need to show people, okay, we've been telling you here the 25 or whatever games that are we have in store. Let's actually see what those look like now, and then focus on some of the features that maybe a video doesn't really help sell. Things like the 3D audio that you and I at least are really excited about, and how that's going to add to the generational shift. I think they've already, to an extent, been doing that with their recent long playouts of Ratchet and Clank and the Rift Apart, I believe is what the full title is, and more of that kind of thing. So far, it doesn't appear that Microsoft has had an answer to those drops, and I think if Sony can keep up that pace, where we're hearing things from third-party developers and first-party developers about when you see a next-gen title, you will be impressed. Do you have anything more strategy specific?
They have to do what they've always been able to do, which is come in with really compelling content. Here's our third-party stuff. It's always been on both consoles, but we're supplementing that with something that everybody else doesn't have, which is, our first-party or like PlayStation Studios content. What I think they've always done well is like essentially showing you like a 2-year roadmap of what the console will have in store for them, for owners of the consoles. And I assume they'll do what they always do, which is like, here's some great titles, here's some titles that you didn't know about, and then here's the thing that you've been always looking for, and like here's a long enough gameplay show off of like God of War, Spider-Man 2, or whatever it's going to be, that that shows enough of a game to go like, I'm 100% bought into this and I want it now. And you go, well, yeah, well, you're going to wait another year, but
Right. Yeah.
here's the game that you're going to be playing in a year from now. And they've done that consistently. They did it with Last of Us 2. They did it with Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
They always managed to show enough of a game to show you, A, it's not just a pre-rendered video. B, it's not like shininess. It's like, oh, here, like, look at the shiny details, but don't think too hard about the gameplay. They always show enough of a game to go like, this looks like a really compelling experience.
Yeah. What's interesting too is that they don't appear to be shy about doing in development game footage and exceeding that footage with some of their videos in the past. To see,
they're one of the few companies that can show like an early vertical slice and then deliver on that vertical slice. Not 100%, but in none of the ways that matter to most people, where you go, yeah, maybe missing like some of these promises, but they deliver on so much of what they said they would that you overlook those shortcomings. The only thing I would say is that, and this is something that they do have to address, is that this is probably going to be the last E3 that they can pull a regular Sony, because the heat is on them right now, and Microsoft is maybe a year away from really being able to start showing that the purchases that they've made and the investments that they've made into places or people like Rare is going to start paying off. So they really don't have a lot more time left to just be like resting on just going like, our PlayStation Studios titles are good enough for you to just keep buying PlayStation. They need to start swinging hard at the value offering that comes with their monthly services that they have been successful at selling. But if they want to keep seeing those huge profit margins that they've been able to over the past like 7 months, they really need to start showing more than just studio titles and showing that their services are something that's worth investing in. Because right now Microsoft is doing a great job at showing how inadequate Sony services actually are compared to Microsoft's right now. Well, thank you everybody for following along. We'll get this out to you as soon as we can.
See you next time.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.